Professor. That was a fascinating presentation and certainly rang bells inside of my heart. I was asked to talk about the potential of public-private partnerships in meeting the challenges, economic and political challenges of the continent and the country. And they wanted me to speak about my experience with the Beira Corridor Group. So a bit of background. In 1965, the government of Rhodesia unilaterally declared independence from the United Kingdom. And as a consequence of that, in 1966, the United Nations Security Council imposed sanctions on Rhodesia. And one of those sanctions was to position a frigate off the port of Beira to stop any international trade which might be of benefit to this country. As a consequence, in 1966, the port of Beira was essentially closed to traffic from the hinterland. And the whole system that had been built up using the port of Beira to feed the hinterland, a pipeline from Beira to Faruka refinery in Mutare, a railway line through to Harare, which serviced Zambia and the Congo, and a road where all became inoperable. And the port itself, very run down. And when I was chief executive of the Cold Storage Commission, this is a large organization, turning over about $2 million a day. We were the largest meat organization in Africa, and we were shipping beef to Europe. And I was forced by the non-availability of alternatives to use Cape Town as the port of conveyancing the meat to Europe. Now, one of our factories, which was the main export factory, was in Shinoy. So we were shipping beef by road through Cape Town and then to Europe. It's very expensive, 3,000 kilometers of road haulage in large trucks. And in addition to that, the government of South Africa, often not known for this, but we're very corrupt. And I was forced to pay bribes to use facilities in Cape Town. And this annoyed me intensely. So I spoke to a few colleagues in the private sector, and I asked, why don't we fix Beira? It's 1987. The sanctions are over a long time ago. Mozambique was in a civil war between Frelimo and Renamo, and it wasn't going to be easy. But I persuaded a team of private sector leaders to join me, and we formed the Beira Corridor Group. This was a group of 1,000 companies in Botswana, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. And we put our heads together, raised some money from ourselves, and we started work on the corridor. We rebuilt the railway line to Beira. We did that. We put new sleepers down. We ballasted the railway line. We bought locomotives for Mozambique. We bought 11 locomotives from GM in the United States. We fixed the road. We fixed the pipeline. And we extended the pipeline from Faruka through to Harare. The cost of the program was about $750 million. We dredged the port of Beira, and within 3 years, the port of Beira was carrying a third of Zimbabwe's foreign trade, including the majority of our tobacco. And this was an example of private sector working with government in meeting a need for a critical infrastructure, and it attracted the attention of the world. We had 32 of our staff killed by Renamo in the process. They were killed in ambushes and armed attacks, and The Zimbabwe government gave us 5,000 troops to protect the corridor, to protect our people, while we were operational down there. In addition to that, when we started work, in the first year I went down to Beira to have a look at the situation, I was staggered by the human conditions in Mozambique. I was really, really shocked. In 1987, 500,000 people died of starvation in South Africa, in Mozambique. Now, I don't know whether you've ever seen conditions like that, whether you've actually seen communities where people are dying of starvation, skeletons, women without clothes, people without shoes, people hiding in the bush because they were ashamed of the conditions that they were in. I came back to Harare and we organized a campaign to raise food and clothing for the corridor, and we sent truckloads of stuff down there. But one thing I learned was that the Americans were financing Renamo along with South Africa. And I, in my limited experience, in those days I was not a politician, in my limited experience, I recognized that while the civil war continued in Mozambique, there was no future for that country and no future for its people. And no matter how much foreign aid you poured into that country, if there was no infrastructure, you couldn't meet the needs of the people. So I spent every 3 months, I went to the United States and I lobbied the American government. And I lobbied against Renamo. I was horrified to find that Renamo had an office in Washington. And Washington, there were Christians in Washington that were sending weapons in cases to Renamo. And I talked to people there. I found some marvelous people. The Africa Committee in the Senate was great. The chairman of that group was a senator from Kansas, a wonderful woman. And I talked to her about this, and I was passionate about it. And so she said, look, I'll come and have a look. So she flew out to Harare. We had a jet. One of our companies had a jet. And I stuck her in this jet, and we flew down to Beira. And we went down to Beira at forest height, over the corridor, over the railway line. She could see the conditions. Landed in Beira. We showed her the port of Beira, showed her what we were doing. And remember, we were spending our money. We told the World Bank we need their help. I don't think that's ever happened to them in the history of the bank. We said to them, we're going to do this. We were spending our own money. And then I flew her to Maputo, and we had lunch with Samora Machel. And then we flew back to Harare, and that evening we had dinner with Mugabe. 6 weeks later, I got a call from George Shultz, the American Secretary of State, probably the third most powerful politician in the United States. Would I come to Washington and come and see him? So we took 6 businessmen from the region across to Washington, 2 from Zambia, 2 from Botswana, and 2 from Zimbabwe. 11 o'clock in the morning, we walked in to George Shultz's office. He was sitting at the end of the end of this vast room, and he stood up, and he's a big man. He's over 6'4", I think. And he said, which of you come from Zimbabwe? So we raised our hands, and he said, you guys give me more trouble than anybody else in Africa. So I thought, boy, that's a bad start to this interview. Anyway, he said to us, look, what's impressing us in the United States is that you guys are spending your own money. You haven't even asked for help. Why? Why are you doing this? So we put a map on the floor, and we sat around this map, including George Shultz on the floor, and we showed him that Beira was the closest port to us in the region. And for us in the interior, this was a critical resource. This was a critical infrastructure. And I said we were doing this because it was in our interests. And then we said to him, peace in Mozambique is in our interests. It should be in yours. And 3 months later, the Americans formally recognized Frelimo. And you can see from that kind of intervention, and the key to that was a minister in Zimbabwe called Ushuwakunzi. He was a bit of a rogue. Maybe you know that. Maybe what you don't know is his children became Christians at my church. And they exercised some influence on him. But he was the Minister of Transport. And he was a marvelous decision maker. If I had a problem, or if we had a problem in the corridor, or we needed something, we'd go to Ushuwakunzi, and it was done. When I was experiencing the loss of staff through ambushes by Renamo, I went to him. He made the phone call to the commander of the army in my presence. And I had a brigadier general attached to me with 5,000 troops in a couple of weeks. This cooperation, this partnership between the private sector and the government is critical in making things happen. I'll just give another example, a more current one. 2 years ago, if you had gone into the Home Affairs office here in town and sought to get a passport, you would have had to bribe somebody, you'd have to get a runner, you'd have to queue in the sunshine with hundreds of people seeking passports. It was time-consuming, it was dirty, it was uncomfortable. 3 weeks ago, my wife went to get a passport at the passport office. She was ushered into this room. It was properly organized. There were people dealing with people. She was dealt with. It took them 2 hours. She paid the fee. $20 of that fee went to CBZ. And who organized that process? CBZ. So you can go today to any branch of CBZ in this country, and you can get a passport. And the difference is that you've got public-private partnership in the passport office. My wife got her passport in 3 days. She could not believe it. She got a phone call in the morning and was told, you can come and collect your passport. She went in, and it was waiting for her. Public-private partnerships can transform lives. When the president became president in 2018, he phoned me up personally and asked if I would come and see him. And he asked me if I would be prepared. Now, I'm an opposition parliamentarian. I'm in the opposition. You know, Robert Mugabe's been chasing me around for 17 years. You know, all sorts of things have been happening to us. Assassination attempts, the works. And I get this phone call from the president. And he says, Eddie, are you prepared to come and help me with some of the problems we confront? I said, yes. My colleagues didn't understand that in the MDC, I can tell you that. Okay? But what has happened since then? The president has declared that he wants the private sector to take the lead in developing the economy. And since that challenge has gone out, we have formed business groups to tackle the power shortage, to tackle the rehabilitation of the railways, to tackle the construction of roads across the country, including all urban and rural roads. We've established a company to give every household in Zimbabwe, informal and formal, title deeds. Right now, in Epworth and in Chitungwiza, we are issuing title deeds to ordinary people. 100,000 title deeds this week. And it's being done by 6 ministries working with the private sector. And these are all triple Ps. And we're not asking the government for any money. We're not asking the government even for a guarantee. And you ask, how can we do that? On the power side, for example, 2 years ago, the private sector met the president at State House, and we said to him, if we don't solve this power problem, you can forget development. He turned to Sydney Garter, who's the chairman of ZESA, and said, what are you doing about it? Sydney said, don't look at me, we don't have any money. He then called in 4 ministers, and he said to them, what are you doing about it? Minister of Mines, Minister of Agriculture, Minister of Commerce and Industry, Minister of Energy. No solutions. He said to me, Eddie, what can you guys do? I said, well, have a look. So we called together all the big electricity consumers, 76 of them, 76 companies like Zimplats. Zimplats turned over $1.5 billion last year. It's worth about $3 billion. And we brought 76 company chief executives together and we said, what can we do about this? And they'd consume 1,000 megawatts of power per annum. That's $1.4 billion worth of power. They're the biggest power consumers in the country. They said, let's form a group, and what we will do is, using our demand basis and our balance sheets, we will invest in generation, we will invest in transmission, and we will trade in electricity. And that group is trading in power today. And in 2025, load shedding in Zimbabwe will be a history because of what these guys are doing. Now, I don't need to tell you. Can I just tell you a little bit about the title deed program? 2 years ago, the president announced on AFReG Unity Day, 22nd of December 2022, that he was going to give title deeds to everybody in informal housing settlements. Have you noticed people are building houses? Have you noticed it? Have you tried to buy bricks? Even cement is being rationed. We've got the biggest building boom underway in this country in our history. There's more than 1.5 million homes under construction, employing thousands of people. It's one of the main drivers of our economy, and most of it is funded by the diaspora. It's money coming into the country. And these people do not have title. These homes you see, Goromonzi, Dombashawa, Seke, name it. Go to every country, every city in the country. There are these informal housing settlements springing up. And they don't have title. It's these land barons. They've been selling land that didn't belong to them. And the president said, I'm going to give you title. Problem was, they didn't have the capacity. So we formed a group with a trust, and the trust is all not-for-profit. All not-for-profit. We don't expect these groups to make money because that's not their job. Their job is to deliver a service to who? To us in the private sector. And that's what they're doing. And right now, the program is underway. And do you know how transformative that is going to be? We had a meeting in Chitungwiza on Thursday last week, where the CCC councillors, which are my old colleagues, were opposing the title deed program because they said that was ZANU-PF. And they said, ZANU-PF is doing that to get votes, and therefore we don't want it in our districts. I tell you this, I could show you a picture. The people came to the Chitungwiza Town Council offices in their hundreds, and they said, we demand title. One old gogo there said, I've paid rent in this community for 50 years. I want a home which I can leave to my kids. We are giving title to property probably worth at least $200 billion. It's by far and away the biggest asset that we have as a country. And simply by giving each of these people a piece of paper signed by a minister, we are giving them value. We're giving every family thousands of dollars, in some cases hundreds of thousands of dollars of value, which they can leave to their children. And I want to tell you this, at our insistence, not the government's insistence, madam, every wife is registered on the title deed as a co-owner. Now, I just mentioned one thing. That wouldn't be happening if we weren't men of faith. And this is something we can give to our government, to our country, to our continent, as Christians, working for the benefit of all without pay. But contributing, one guy said to me last week, when I was talking about, about carbon credits and conservation, and I was in the meeting, and I gave them a vision of what I had in mind. And they said, Eddie, that's impossible. I said, men, here in this room, we dream the impossible, and we make it happen. God bless you.